Tuesday, June 24, 2025. With me today is former Minnesota Supreme Court Justice and Eden Prairie native, Paul Anderson. Welcome, Paul.
I'm pleased to be here.
Paul, I'm excited to find out about your life. You were born in 1943.
I was the second of two children. I came into this world when Adolf Hitler was at the peak of his power in Europe, which I like to cite as a point in time that my parents showed confidence in the future to bring a new being into this world. I grew up on a farm. My dad was a dairy farmer. My mother was a school teacher who had to quit teaching school when she got married. That's the way it was back then. But it was a great way to grow up. There were a number of other farms, a lot of dairy farms. Southern half of Eden Prairie would be the dairy farmers, crop farmers. The northern part would be the Czech Bohemian truck farmers. But as my mother said in her book, which maybe she wrote this book here, The History of Eden Prairie. There's a lot of good information in there. But one of the things she says in there is that growing up on the farm was a bit of an idyllic growing up. Not quite as idyllic as she maybe paints it, but here are the things about it. You were a family unit. The husband and wife were partners in the operation of the farm. And the children had to do their part. I had chores and a lot of work. I learned how to work hard as a young person, but I had a wonderful parents who didn't work me too hard. There are some Eden Prairie people that their parents worked them too hard. They did not. They wanted me to explore why. Now, the thing about that too, being part of that family economic unit, you develop a closeness to the family. I used to say that my father and I developed a level of communication. It didn't have to be verbal. It could be tone and nuance and whatever. When we were putting up hay, I would just watch what he's doing and I would know what he wanted me to do. And that was something special that you experience growing up at a farm. And there was a certain isolation to it. But when my mother came out to Eden Prairie, she didn't fit in.
She didn't?
No, she didn't. She came from a family in Aiken. Although her father had died, it was a pretty well-read, sophisticated family. She went to St. Cloud Teachers College and came down here to teach, hired by my father, who was on the school board back then, a single farmer. I don't know if he had any eyes on my mother at the time or not, but they developed a relationship and ultimately married. But it was a bit hard for my mother because she came from a family that was well read. Books were important. We always had books and magazines in the home to read. I can remember we're always waiting for Thursday afternoon because that's when Life magazine came and I would literally devour it. And some of my contemporaries subsequently told me how much they envied our family growing up in that atmosphere where ideas were talked about. I mean, my family was Republican. Hey, Anderson Lakes is named after my family. They settled out here in the 1850s. They were Lincoln Republicans. The family revered Father Abraham. And so that is the history, but it was always on the moderate side of the Republican Party. And not the isolationists that came with Taft and some of the others, but a Harold Stassen, Eisenhower type open-mindedness background. And that's the atmosphere with which I was raised on the farm.
So you mentioned the farm. Where was the farm located and who were some of your neighbors?
Well, he didn't have a lot of neighbors. I mean, our hired man lived next door. But if you come west on 494, exit and go on 212 and 5, you go almost directly west for a while, and then it turns. I think there's a grocery store there now, Lund's, there's a bank. Right, if you head up right through the bank, up that hill, that's where our farm was. We were located on a hill that overlooked, and my mother writes about that, is, okay, not the best farmland. Sandy, shallow, wouldn't hold the moisture, so it's not the typical rich farmland that you sometimes associate with Minnesota. So the crops were okay, but it was a good place to grow up. We had dairy cattle, Holstein. When I got on the court, I used to like to tell people that I can talk farm. And that served me well as I worked in the state government. I mean, I can talk tractors, John Deere, by the way, cows, Holstein, hay loaders, farmhand.
Did you enjoy farming?
Yes and no. I knew I did not want to be a farmer. It is a hard way to make a living, especially a dairy farm. You have to milk those cows morning and night, morning and night. You are tied to the farm because of that. I can only remember one occasion where my father had to go up to a wedding up north there, St. Cloud, whatever. He skipped one night milking because he couldn't get anybody to milk the cow. But it was hard work. It was hot in the summer, cold in the winter. So I knew I didn't. At age 14, I decided I didn't want to be a farmer.
Do you think it was integral to your character?
Pardon?
Do you think it was integral to your character?
That was integral to the way I grew up. I was growing up in an atmosphere where I was supposed to expand my ideas. I was always interested in history, like a videographer, a history major at Princeton, is that I always found history very interesting, and I found politics to be interesting. I would follow. I mean, I knew all of the Eisenhower's cabinet members. I had opinions with respect to Dulles and Herter and Nixon, all these people back then. Very early on, I formed ideas and concepts, but that was the atmosphere in which I grew up. Mm-hmm. And so maybe the farming was a tad bit restrictive given that line of thinking.
When you weren't working or going to school, what were you doing for fun?
Ooh, there wasn't a lot of fun. I had time for fun. In the summer, we would go swimming. Ward Elastic had a farm on Bryant Long Lake. He had a little stand where he sold pop and candy. And so we'd maybe go swimming there once a week in the lake. That was kind of fun. There was, but it was not a whole lot of fun for diversion. However, when I was at school, basketball was very important to the Eden Prairie community. From the early age, I told my mother that I'm going to be playing basketball. I revered players like Ronnie Halosic and Burr Garrison. Ronnie Halosic was Ward's son, and he was good enough to actually get on the University of Minnesota basketball team. So I idolized them. My mother picked up on that. So when I was a little kid, I had a wonderful parents and a wonderful mother. She had made this little jacket for me, okay? I was too young to have earned a letter, but what she did is put on the back of it, Eden Prairie. I was so proud to wear this jacket that had the Eden Prairie colors on it and Eden Prairie in the background. But that's the kind of
Draw me a picture. It's Friday or Saturday night, the basketball game. Where's it taking place? Is it at the consolidated school?
Yes, okay. You had to get your chores done. before he went up to the school for the basketball game. So we kind of hurried up, did an early milking, and then we would go up. And the Eden Prairie Consolidated School, you go up there now and you go to that old gym. It's really small, okay? I mean, the circles for the key and the center are only separated about a foot or so. I mean, it was really, but when it was first built, it was classy. It was a gym. But that's where we played basketball, and then we would sit in the bleachers. And I can still remember the basketball players that played when I was growing up and that watch. And C.V. Peterson, Eden Prairie native. If you ask C.V. how good a basketball player I was, he will wax eloquent, okay? He has an inflated view of how good a basketball player I was. I was an okay shot, but I was a playmaker. I was the point guard and directed the team. And in our senior year, we were conference champions. We did good. Connolly Engstrom was the coach. Kurt Connolly was the assistant coach. And it was a pretty good team. That allows me to transition, okay? We had a small school. My class was about 35, dropped down a couple of that before graduation. Pound for pound, we had some pretty good teachers. Not all. There were a few clinkers in there, but there were some really good ones. Conley Engstrom, brilliant math teacher. Kurt Connolly, he taught industrial arts, but his best course was actually biology. But he quit teaching that. I remember I had him for 10th grade biology. One of my favorite classes, because he was good. He got us engaged in the topic. Martha Wanek loved history, and so we had, and then we had bad English teachers, except for my senior year. That's when Mr. McShane came, and he had standards. I was shocked when he came and realized how bad I was in English. But he shaped us up a lot, that senior. So we had some really good teachers. So I came from a country school. I came with a fairly good foundation, led to my some of the people whose names I've mentioned.
Do you have any particular stories that you remember, memories that you have from your high school years that kind of stand out for you?
Well, I mentioned C.V. Peterson earlier. C.V. had wonderful parents, farmers, but he started working on the farm early. So I can remember working on the grounds of our Presbyterian church, see this gigantic, back for then it was gigantic, dump truck go by, and just little head above the window. And that was C.V. Peterson driving his family truck down 169. I mean, you got thrust into situations rather early. Some of the other, a lot of what we did, because it was farming, centered around the seasons. Spring, it was planting, plowing, and getting ready. But that's when the Northerns came up Purgatory Creek. And Highway 5 went across Purgatory Creek, so there was a little higher level, about this high a little bit. You can't call it a dam. It's just that the Northerns had to pause there before they swam up over it. And so we used to get a few Northerns in the Springs River. And it was kind of fun. I mean, the game warden grew up right across the street. He knew what was going on down there. He used to play cat and mouse with my dad. He never caught my dad, but that was one of his objectives. He caught our neighbor boy, Alan Jorth, one time. He never caught me. Interestingly enough, though, when I became a junior, my dad forbid me to go down and spear fish. He said, "You got too much of a reputation in the community. We're not going to risk you getting caught." Now here, my dad's a school board member, prominent. Doesn't matter if you can, but he didn't want me to get caught. And in the fall, let's say we had an elongated pheasant hunting season. It started in September, second week or so, and ran to November. If you follow the normal season, it's about 4 weeks, the end of October, early November. That was not the way it was on the farm. My dad was a crack shot. I can remember one year he shot maybe 45, 46 pheasants, but it was one of the staple meals for us in the fall to have pheasant. And my mother had a great way of fixing pheasant. So spring we would have illegal fish out of the creek, and then in the fall we'd have pheasants that were shot out of the season. A couple of other things that I think about is community events. Thrashing and silo filling. My dad and 4 other farmers bought a thrashing machine. It was at the end of the thrashing era. Combines were coming in, but they had this thrashing machine that generally held together and worked. So each summer, the farmers would get together and we'd thrash grain as a group. That was a big event. You would communicate with your fellow farmer. I learned a lot sitting under a wagon full of grain shocks when the thrashing machine broke down, where I listened to the conversation of my older cousins and the Holossi boys who were 6 or 7 years senior to me. I learned a lot that way. But anyway, that was a fun time, especially going over to Fritz Holossi's place, because he had the stand down at the lake and he'd bring out pop and candy sometime. In the fall, it was silo filling. So those were community events, and the farmers eat together, and the housewives would compete with each other to cook a wonderful meal. So I had some good memories of that time.
Farming depends on the vagaries of weather.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember any catastrophic or difficult weather?
We had some, but in the 50s and 60s, it wasn't as bad. I can remember my mother talking, she'd drill us into us, is that how bad it was in the 30s. And she said she can remember when she would put it this way: there wasn't a blade of grass in the haymow because the crops just didn't grow. There was, but is that the crops were scarce and the hay. For the most part, we survived. Our farm, as I said, was sandy, so we depended upon rain more than some other places. But it was okay. I don't remember
You mentioned your mom, and because I'm a member of the Historical Society, I need to ask: do you remember her working on the Historical Society business?
Absolutely. I said earlier, my mother, at least in the environment of Eden Prairie, would be classified as an intellectual. She loved books, she loved to read, and she loved history. And when we kids were growing up, gone off to college, she was doing something, she said, "Oh my gosh, some of the old settlers in Eden Prairie are dying." And their knowledge of the prairie is dying with them. So she started organizing, and this is kind of the foundation for the Historical Society. She would organize meetings where 1 or 2 members of the old family, 2 in Beggs did it from the Anderson family, the Tuckies, whatever, would be asked to put together a presentation on the family history. And then the society members, which became the society members, would gather and they would have this presentation, maybe from the Brens, and they would learn about their community. And that became the foundation for the Historical Society and for much of the information in her book. And she must have done that with a dozen different families. And it was quite a deal. It took effort. It took a little bit of maybe the genius is not the right term, but a little bit of an understanding of literature and history to do this. But she gave this community a wonderful gift by preserving the history as told by some of those who actually lived it.
In thinking about the years between when you were born and Eden Prairie today, what are the changes that stand out for you?
There were no changes. I came up from Shakopee and driving through the community. And see, when I drive through Eden Prairie, I'll say, oh, that's the Mitchell farm. That's the Holosic farm. I mean, you got all these fancy houses that are in, $1 million plus, whatever. And that was just farmland. And so some of the changes, school enrollment. My cousins, Kenny and Tom, graduated 5 years ahead of me. Their class size was 17 or 18. By the time I graduated, 5 years later, it was up to 33. 2 years after me, it was up in the 50s. So Eden Prairie was changing. And it was no longer a farming community. You had people moving out, more adventuresome, but people wanted a little bit more space and area to run. And I mean, Scenic Heights on Brian Long Lake was one of the first really Tony additions. People came out and they wanted a little bit of a hill overlooking Bryant Lake, and all these people had jobs in the city. The Seavalds down by where the Eden Prairie Presbyterian Church is now located, they were city people, but they were city people who wanted to be part of the country. And so the change was that in school we had a nice mix. Our farm kids, of course I was viewed as a hick farm kid, and of course when I can remember playing basketball against St. Paul Johnson. We played in the Armory downtown Minneapolis, and they really gave us a hard time for being farm kids. They said, did you guys wipe the manure off your shoes before you came here? Oh yeah, comments like that. And they were beating up on us for the first 3 quarters. And there's something happened. We just finally got ticked. And we just blew them away in the 4th quarter and won the game. But there was that type of, we were country folks. Eden Prairie was country then, even though we had some fairly sophisticated people out here. I tore up my knee when I was in high school, torn cartilage. One of the finest orthopedic knee surgeons in the state moved out to Scenic Heights. My mother learned who that was, and she had him operate on me. I've talked to orthopedic surgeons and said, well, an operation like that should last only 8-10 years and have trouble. That operation was in August of 1959. My knee is still solid. So we had sophisticated people like that coming out here and integrating into the community. So that was a big change. Then you had some buildings. You had Charlene come out here. I forget what it's called now, but it's on Highway 5. It's got the water tower there. I remember. That came out when I was in junior high. You had Rosemont Engineering. So you had a few industries coming out here, saying that was changing the landscape, and some housing divisions. So yes, a lot of change. Interestingly enough, my sister does not really like coming out to the new Eden Prairie because it's so built up. Doesn't bother me that much. And I probed her on that bit, and she said, well, Paul, when I was growing up, I would get on my horse and I would ride forever. Unencumbered, I could ride forever. That Eden Prairie is gone and I miss it. Which brings up another thing, Bump Boyd. Horses. Mm-hmm. They were a big thing out here. I was not big into horses, but my sister was. And Bump Boyd would you know, he would sponsor a rodeo for the young people each year, each summer. And for about 6 to 8 weeks, the young people would ride their horses up to the corral at Bumpoint's farm. They would do steer roping and calf roping, barrel racing. Pretty decent rodeo. They were pretty good. But that was a big thing that, not particularly myself, but others did for fun, is that those kids would gather and put on that rodeo. That was 4-H. That was a big thing for us farm kids. You would, I generally had a calf and a cow that I would take to the county fair. We had to keep records and do that, and the county fair was a big gathering. One of my absolute pleasures at the county fair, there was a Dairy Queen just a couple of blocks away from the fairgrounds. Back then, you could get their biggest Dairy Queen cone for 25 cents.
Was that in St. Paul?
Oh, that was Hopkins. It was Hopkins. I remember the great pleasure I had buying one of those gigantic Dairy Queen cones when we stayed at the county fair. I went to the state fair once with my cow.
So it sounds like it was a fairly idyllic youth?
Yes and no.
What's the no part?
There were struggles. There was hard work. I mean, very interesting thing. Now, my wife grew up on a farm, hog farm, 100 miles west of here. They were really poor when he was growing up. 7 kids. One of the siblings got polio. Remembers the parents borrowing money from the kids' piggy bank in order to get gas to go into the cities to Sister Kenny to visit her. We were never poor. We never wanted for anything, but we had to be very frugal. There was a church secondhand store downtown Minneapolis. My mother would go and shop for clothes there. I remember she got one jacket for me. It was some of this new acrylic fake. It was ugly, but it never wore out. I wore that thing for about 4 years, hated it. But she would get these secondhand clothes in order to make things. And we had chickens, laid eggs. My mother would take eggs to Hovander's, the National Tea in Hopkins. She would have a crate of eggs where she got enough money for that would pretty much cover the cost of groceries. Oh, another thing. In the summer, sometimes she'd buy a crate of Italian prunes or apricots, sometimes cherries. Oh, apples. Delicious apples were big then. That was a pleasure that we had.
As you reflect on your early life in Eden Prairie, are there any words of wisdom that you would share from your experience, or what you would say to future generations?
Okay, yes and no. This may seem a little bit out of the envelope, but it works, okay? I'm patriotic. I fall on the liberal side of the spectrum, but that does not in any way diminish my patriotism and my love for the country. We are indeed a land of opportunity. And what I tell young people is, your job in this country is to spot these opportunities and show up for them. Now, my life opportunity was to grow up in a very embracing, healthy family atmosphere that gave me confidence and a self-awareness that was very good. That's the experience that I had growing up here in Eden Prairie. And I tell young people, you show up for an opportunity, you have an experience, you take advantage of it, and you learn lessons. And those are lessons that stay with you the rest of your life. So as we're talking about my growing up in Eden Prairie, I had an experience here. and I learned lessons. Hard work, to be open-minded, to work hard, those lessons have stayed with me all my life. So they have made me who I am. And the lessons of a loving, embracing, supportive family, discipline, whatever, all of those lessons have stayed with me through my life. So if you're talking about my experience growing up in Eden Prairie, I can tell you this one, that, but the core is that. The experience of growing up here, the legacy of that experience is I learned some very good lessons which I've taken with me throughout my life.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for joining us today.
That's it?
That's it.
I got so much more to tell you.